It's happening even more because the medical sensing is becoming easier and easier. I mean, this is a product from Bosch, but there's many other products out there like this, where you can go ahead and measure your blood pressure, your oxygen saturation, if you're looking at an asthma trial, you can do peak flow, you've got your weight directly connected to the internet. All of these can happen. Now, interesting things, this introduces interesting biases. So we were doing an obesity study, and a whole bunch of people suddenly lost 20 pounds, right? 20 pounds in a week. And I'm sitting there with the physician, and we're wondering, like, this data doesn't make any sense. I mean, 20 pounds in a week. So we sent a nurse over to the house of these patients. And we said, can we just weigh you? Weighed them. They were 20 pounds heavier. You know what? Everybody wants to be a little bit lighter. You can stand on a weight scale like this, and you can feel a lot lighter, and you feel good about yourself too. So, what I'm trying to say is that these things do introduce new biases and other biases. So these things have to be treated carefully. But this is the reality. The internet is full of that. We get ads. 8 out of 10 ads are not actually appropriate for us. 2 out of 10 are. It doesn't matter if it's a non-medical issue. For medical issues, you have to be a lot more accurate. So there's a lot of thinking on the biases and the corrections that need to be applied here, which are far more stringent than the internet. But the new sensing technologies are making it easier and easier to take some of those decisions out from subjective things or even semi-objective things like a weight scale. I mean, here's some revolutions taking place. Disposable, removable medical tattoos that can measure your blood pressure and pulse. That's happening now. Contact lenses that can transmit information. This is a DARPA program taking place right now. The eye is a very sensitive source. You can look at diabetic glucose uptake. You can look at glucose. You can look at blood pressure, even if you design it right. There's many things you can look at, and many of us are working on these areas as well right now. So small things are going to make very big changes. Now, you could take that to an extreme. You could think of it as being a camera and transmitting what you see to somebody else. And now you're talking about real telepathy. That's not clinical trials. That's different. Time for another talk. But what I'm trying to sense is these things are really changing the way clinical trials might work. You have groups like Patients Like Me, trying their best to say we have a patient community. And I think you've all heard about Patients Like Me. They've done some really good work. They're still starting to get more and more rigorous, and there was a lot of tension when they started between the academic groups, the clinical trial groups, and them, but now there's a convergence taking place here. And I'll end with a few slides that I'd like to credit Dr. Atul Butte to, and they're really important slides talking about how clinical trials are going to lead to ultimate personalization. You have a person who's down a path to a good outcome, somewhere along something goes wrong, and you have a poor outcome, whatever it be your condition. For the patient, what keeps this person on the right track versus the wrong track? How can we keep the person on the right track? These are the questions that a physician is trying to answer. And they're looking to the clinical trials and the data and the information to give them answers to that. Right now, they're dependent on a few clinical trials and a few data sets and combined results and summaries from experts to make these decisions. Now we're starting to get personal genomics pretty soon. You'll hear a lot about that next week. Well, what about the genetics is there something in the genetics that is making that difference? That's an important question. A lot of physicians are starting to focus on that, but many of us know that it isn't the genetics that might be causing the problem. It might be your social circumstance that's causing the problem. So you can't just say, let's look at only the genetics. Let's look at the social circumstance. What does that mean? There has to be clinical trials on the social circumstance to understand what the implication is for this particular patient. Those trials are happening now. Those are the sort of studies that are taking place now that ultimately may be crafted in here. Let's add one more thing. What is the physician doing or the clinician doing that changes it from that downward spiral back up to a good outcome? And how can we keep track of that? Those are all very important pieces of data that drive this decision. The world of big data is here. We've all heard about it. I mean, it won't be useful without proper clinical trials in the background to understand the implications of it. But once you have it, there are profound things that you can do. And this, when you start looking at clinical trials today, this is the world people who are designing clinical trials today are getting prepared to happen tomorrow. And so many trials are happening on the social context, many trials are happening on the genetic side of it, and many things are happening on what physicians do and what impact that has. I think it's a really beautiful thing. I think that this is where the personalization of medicine is going to lead us to. So what I tried to do was take you in a little tour of from the past to what's happening now and in the next 5 to 10 years. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kothari. And we will take questions from the 2 microphones in the back of the room so we can hear you on the video that we're taping. So if you don't mind going to the microphones to ask your questions, thank you.
Hello. Yes, I can.
You seem to be a proponent of this adaptive trials so that you can get to some outcome early. How do you account for the risk of long-term effects when you shorten a trial or you act on early information?
That's a great question. So first of all, just to be clear, I'm a big proponent of adaptive trials early in the trial cycle. So as opposed to a pivotal trial at the end, it's a situation where you have many different options, many different drugs. Let's figure out which one's working, and then let's test those ones more extensively rather than wasting money on testing all of them extensively and not getting an answer. So that's the first half of it, is it's more of a triage mechanism than a necessarily pivotal decision-making mechanism. So that's where I feel their utility is the greatest. The second comment I would make is when you take something like Europe, for example, they often approve, let's take medical devices, a little sooner than they do in the US, but then they really ask for a registry database following up for years in many cases on safety effects. What they have done is try to balance getting a good technology to the market sooner with more consistent oversight later. In the US, it's very different. Once you get approved, it's a different game. You don't need to have that sort of oversight from the FDA. So to answer to your question is focusing adaptive trials really in the early stages of clinical trials to triage, combined with adding maybe some oversight in the later post-approval stages, can really help us quickly discard bad techniques without causing much harm while bringing up good techniques faster.
Yes, can I? Well, I came across a lot of doctors and some people who make pills that they call it a lot from Chinese things, and they try it on people, but it's not considered a prescription. You can just buy it, and why isn't it tested like a real and see if it's really good or not, because it's very unusual.
Are you talking about alternative medicine techniques?
Yes.
Yes. So a couple of things. One is I agree with you. I think that many of these alternative medicine techniques do need to be tested and tried, and many of them are being tested and tried. I mean, acupuncture, for example, as a technique, not a pill, but as an alternative, what is considered an alternative technique, has been actually extensively tested and tried, and there are certain circumstances in which it has shown efficacy. There's others which, many homeopathic ones, for example, that have not gone through very big clinical trials, and many other pills and techniques that have not. In the past, the argument used to be, which I do not subscribe to, but the argument used to be there are thousands of years of experience that have gone into this that translate. There's a lot of thousands of years of things that we have done incorrectly too, that we all continue to do incorrectly as well. So I agree, but at this point I think the FDA is not going to be taking on
Yeah, and why does,
nutraceuticals or otherwise, and so it is up to the individual to be as well informed as they possibly can be, and it's not an easy task.
but it seems like a lot of it, I mean, from what the advertisement they send, seems like it should be very good and without any danger. I mean, like, what did they say? I forgot the names of the stuff.
Sure. So I think the other point to realize here is that, you know, when I showed you that the pictorial of, you know, beneficial and not toxic, not beneficial and not toxic, there may be a case where these compounds, whatever they are, or bark, or whatever it is beneficial in a small subset of people. Most of them showed absolutely no effect in a clinical trial setting. That said, maybe they are beneficial in a small subset, and I hope these new types of trials makes it easier and easier for those studies to be conducted, because the conventional clinical trial technique will show that they are most of them are not effective. I don't want to qualify all of them, but most of them will show them being not effective. But they may be beneficial in a small subset, and we should find the biomarkers.
They kept on saying for bones and things, that for joint pain, what is it, glucosamine and Kothari, and Harvard Medical School had a report that says it doesn't help at all. It's useless.
There's been multiple trials, and I've actually been involved in a couple of trials on the imaging part of glucosamine studies to look at whether the joint space width of the knee increases or decreases with glucosamine intake. And so far, there's been one study that showed a benefit, and I think there's been 5 studies that have shown no benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a master list somewhere of all clinical trials so that if a person is suffering from A, B, or C, he or she can check this to say, hey, there's a trial of this, and now there is one existing, now I'm seeing an address and I can apply to be in the next clinical trial or participate in some fashion?
Right. So for trials that are about to take place or are ongoing, you can go to clintrials.gov, CLINTRIALs, so clintrials.gov. And it's a really nice registry. There are a couple of commercial sites that are now coming up that make it even more user-friendly and easier to use. Clintrials.gov is not that difficult. You go in and you type in the condition, and it will give you a list of active studies right off the bat.
If you go onto Google and this clinical trials of XYZ, some listings will come up and indicates the sources of those trials.
Right. So clintrials.gov is a little more, I mean, Google actually does read from clintrials.gov, but I would say in the U.S., if you want an authoritative source, that's the place to go.
The USD, yes.
In the U.S.
FDA?
They'll clearly state that they're the FDA trials or not, and they'll state who the sponsor is, they'll state who the principal investigator, and they'll even tell you if there's a site near where you are to participate. And it's getting more and more user-friendly day by day. I don't think it's there yet, but give it another 6 months. They're really trying hard to make it easier and easier for people to use.
Thank you.
Well, first off, Dr. Kothari, I'd like to say thank you very much for a brilliant presentation, putting it into a format that's very easy to understand. I had a 2-part question. First off, we do hear in general about the days of the blockbuster drug being over. If not, then I'd like to know, aside from Alzheimer's, what therapeutic areas are actually candidates for that next blockbuster set of drugs. My second question had to do with the fact that the FDA and EMA tend to work at a glacial pace when technological advancement is going at an ever more rapid pace. What kind of catalysts are acting upon those agencies across the globe to help get them caught up to speed with the new clinical trial formats?
Okay, so those are 2 different questions. Let me try. The first one, I mean, it's hard to say what's going to be the next blockbuster drug. I mean, there's still needs in oncology that are completely unmet, and if any of those are hit, remember, blockbuster is the number of patients multiplied by the price you charge per drug, right? So right now, the candidates du jour are what are called orphan indications, which are a really small number of patients, but you can charge $300,000 a year for the drug discovery. So if you have 10,000 patients, it's still a very lucrative market. That's $3 billion a year. So blockbuster in the conventional sense meant a large number of people having a major impact. Alzheimer's is obviously one. Many of the psychiatric disorders are still very open. People barely understand the mechanism behind how they work. Multiple sclerosis is still wide open, for example, as a candidate target. So there's a number. Regarding your second question, I'll make a few comments. One is, the conversion over to electronic data captures and everything happening electronically is speeding things up. Not a huge amount. The 15 years goes to 14 years as a result of it. So there's a tiny improvement. What can cause the biggest improvement, in my opinion, is a couple of things. One is, right now, there's sequential animal and then human studies. And animal models have been notoriously poor, actually, at getting us information. I don't want to denigrate them. There are some that have been wildly successful as well. But at the same time, there is a movement taking place in discussions at the FDA level about maybe trying to overlap some phase 1 human studies while the animal studies are going on. That would save you a couple of years right off the bat in that process. Comes with risk. So you have to balance the risk reward and look at an individual basis. Adaptive trials have the potential to save at least a few years. So combining all of those together, you could cut it down from a 15-year to maybe a 9 or 10 years. It's really hard to go much faster because you can speed up everything. You can speed up electrons and make things faster, memory faster, but you can't speed up time, right? So you need 2 years to look at it, and you want to make sure the safety profile is well understood. You're somewhat constrained in some ways with time. You could do what the European agencies do, which is often allow something first and then have a registry, which would save another year or two. So those are your options to play with. It's not perfect. I mean, the last comment I would make there is biomarkers, right? More and more people are using biomarkers. At the end of the day, the FDA is a little bit conservative on that front, correctly and incorrectly. So biomarkers have a risk. I mean, biomarkers have a risk that the pathway the drug may be acting may not be impacting the biomarker or maybe manipulating it. The causes of the disease that you think are the causes of the disease may not be actually in that biomarker cascade. So you have to be very careful in the use of biomarkers. The FDA has an initiative called the Critical Path Initiative, which it's focusing on optimizing the use of these biomarkers. Those are all ways. But I don't think it's going to go to 3 years from the discovery of a compound anytime in the near future.
Thank you.